Good afternoon, everybody. ISO 26000, too complicated to apply. Everybody agree?
Yes.
Okay, we can go home, that's fine. I'd like to talk a bit about three things today. I'd like to talk a little bit about ISO. This is the unpaid political broadcast, so we'll move through it reasonably quickly. But just to talk a little bit about what ISO is doing, not just in ISO 26000, we have another 19,042 standards. So we cover quite a few, and I just want to talk a bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about how the standard was developed, and actually some of the people in the audience are probably better placed to talk about how it was developed than I was, or that I am. And then talk a little bit about so what, my favourite question. Not to be rude, but so what? What's happened since it was launched? How's it travelling? And perhaps also to talk a little bit about some things that ISO is planning to do a bit later this year to actually get some more feedback about what's going on. And I'll talk a bit about that. If I forget to talk about it, somebody remind me, please. So this is ISO, okay? Very complicated organisation, lots of lines and things. No, I'm joking. You'll see also I have a very weird sense of humour, so please humour me and laugh at least, okay? So, as I said, we have 19,023 standards in the catalogue at the moment. Everything literally from nuts and bolts. So there is an ISO standard on screw threads, both imperial and metric, you'll be pleased to know. So when you next get in a car or get on an aeroplane or whatever, wherever screws hold things together, that's an international standard. We have over 600 organisations in liaison. So we have a liaison with the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, the World Business Council for Sustainability. I see there is someone here from there. The International Chambers of Commerce, etc., etc., etc. The World Meteorological Organization, where we have standards linking very much with climate change and helping forecast global positioning state systems and the like. Somewhat arrogantly we say IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, covers the electrical sector. The International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, covers the telecommunications sector, and we cover everything else. Yeah, okay. I haven't provoked you yet. This is terrible. You're being far too polite. Last year we published 1,200 standards. We have 163 national members, the peak standards body in each country. So we're in 163 countries. And we have 215 active technical committees. And under the so each technical committee covers a subject, nuclear power, aerospace, carpets or textiles, leather, social responsibility, traditional Chinese medicine, things like that. Under that, they have subcommittees and working groups. If you add all the working groups, subcommittees, and technical committees together, we have 3,335 technical bodies. That means that today, being an average Thursday or an average day, there are 15 meetings going on somewhere in the world developing ISO standards. So ISO doesn't just stand for equal or the International Organization for Standardization. It also stands for the International Sightseeing Organization. No. Joke. And here in Geneva we have 153 full-time staff. To be slightly serious about those meetings, we are now really starting to concentrate a lot more on web-based meetings, virtual meetings. We have a WebEx system like everybody else. The difference is if our members are using that for ISO or their stakeholders are using for that, it's free. As I said before, standards are everywhere. You're wearing a standard. We haven't been brave enough to do a standard yet on clothing sizes, because that's got nothing to do with clothing size and everything to do with vanity. But standards around water safety, standards around tourism, standards around safety for kids, standards for the road. We've just had we had a workshop coinciding with the Geneva Motor Show looking at intelligent transport systems, how you can get more people down a road safely, etc. And here are some of the technical committees that ISO has started in the last 5 years. These are new technical committees. And if you look through the list, you'll see that there's a lot of traditional engineering type standards and work going on, and that's ISO's core, if you like. But there's a lot of other stuff in there going on as well. So standards on risk management, for example. Standards on carbon capture and storage, biometrics, facilities management. We have just launched a standard on sustainable events, which is being used. The national version of that is being used to help inform and run the Olympics this year. And as I said before, traditional Chinese medicine. I was in South Africa 3 weeks ago giving a course to the chief executives of 20 ISO standards organizations. And I mentioned traditional Chinese medicine in my usual rather quaint sort of joking sort of way. And about 20 minutes later, they were virtually agreed that they should start a technical committee on traditional African medicine. So there you go. People are also approaching us at the moment and say we should have a standard for halal food. You know, if we can do something as uncontentious as social responsibility, halal food should be really easy. You've all seen this sort of or variations of this slide before, sustainability. Looking at the world from an economic and environmental and a societal perspective. Now, depending who's giving you the speech is where the logo goes, right? Or whose logo goes in the middle. Yeah? So I'm giving the speech, so it's ISO. Okay? But the point I want to make here, and you can't read at the back, let alone the front, the little dots, the breadth of subjects that we have in standards, I think, provides a really holistic response to this. Not complete, not arguing for that, but quite significant. So stuff you've heard of, I think, from ISO, environmental management, looking at greenhouse gas emissions, looking at energy efficiency. Last year we launched a standard ISO 50001 on energy systems management, which I think is a tremendous standard, by the way. Basically, it goes into the boardroom. You know, national versions of the standard, case studies done, return on investment, because I'm an accountant, as you probably could see there. I love money, love money. Return on investment, 3 months in some cases. 15% reduction in energy for no capital investment whatsoever. It's numbers like that in the discussion on sustainability that I think really grabs the boardroom's attention. It's not just about sort of saying how green you are or how societally correct you are. You need to be that, but you also have the economic side of things. You know, one of the key things is, you know, businesses create employment. If they create employment and they help the environment and they are societally looking at society from an equitable perspective, then kind of win-win-win, as we all know. So, to answer the question, see, I got to slide 6. ISO 26000, too complicated? Yeah, right. That's complicated. What I would argue, and you can argue back with me, please, is that the whole reason for ISO 26000 is to do two things. One is, can we have a recognised international definition of what we mean by the thing? Social responsibility. Notice I'm using social responsibility rather than corporate social responsibility, because the committee decided quite early on that it's not just corporates, it's any organisation. It can be a university, it can be an NGO. It could be an individual perhaps, maybe pushing it a bit far. But the alternative, I think, and with huge respect to the people here, so I've been trying to be provocative in the answer, but what do you want? Do you want one international norm and definition, or do you want 1,000? I don't know how many people there are in the room. Let's be really generous and say there's 50. If I went round the room, gave each of you a piece of paper and asked you to write down a definition of social responsibility, Yeah, because I'm an accountant, we'd end up with 52 or 53 definitions, because that's, I'd see if I could screw the scrum a bit, to use the New Zealand expression. But so let's all talk with one voice. And the other thing that I would argue very strongly about the standard itself is people say it's too long, it's too complicated. I would agree maybe it's written in a way that's not particularly user-friendly. But other than that, it's only 80 pages. I mean, how long's the magazine you buy each month? I'm serious. Yeah. I mean, I read The Economist, because I'm an accountant. It's more than 80 pages. Come on. And it's only dealing with, small things like human rights, environment, labour relations. I mean, I congratulate the committee and the group to actually get it into 80 pages. But then, of course, I would say that. Up to you. We've all seen this. I think the world is changing. I hope you think the world is changing. The world is changing from looking at sustainability as these sorts of things. It's, we got to do something. To, actually, there's a point here. And it's a really viable point. How many of you have had in your work anything to do with Chinese organizations or organizations based in China? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sure you all have in one way or another. I've only been in my role for about 3 years, so you would know this better than I. But clearly, this is part of a country strategy to look at sustainability and to look at social responsibility in a completely different way. Now, whether it's deeply felt and deeply meant, you may be a better judge than I. But standards is part of the current 5-year plan in China. ISO's member for China has increased their participation in standardization on these very subjects that I mentioned before. So not just economic, but environmental and societal. They've gone from being about number 30 in terms of participation to number 6. And they've done that in 5 years. Why? Anybody? That was a question.
For trade.
For trade, yeah. For competitive advantage. What do you think about when you think about a Chinese product? Again, hopefully I'm not insulting anybody in the room. Cheap? Dirty? Copied? Low wages?
Not necessarily safe.
Not necessarily safe?
Very successful.
Very successful. Sorry? Innovative? I mean, I've been to China in the last 3 years. I've been probably 4 or 5 times, which doesn't help the carbon footprint, I know that. I've seen a change in 3 years, Steve. And you know, and I know, I think, that you actually order the quality you want. If you want the best quality in the world, you can get it from China. If you want to pay, excuse the vulgarity, if you want to pay crap, you'll get crap. But my point is China knows it's got an image problem. So what's it doing about it? Let's get involved in some of this. Okay, so what's the standard addressing? Let's go back to let's talk about the standard for a minute. The idea of common terminology I've already thrashed to death, so I won't bore you with that again. Looking at how you operationalize social responsibility in an organization. So this is not something that's particularly esoteric. The standard has examples all the way through it, as you guys know. As I say, how many of you actually participated in the working group? 1, 2, 3. Okay, fine. Here you go. You can do the next 4. Stakeholder engagement. looking at enhancing the credibility of reports and claims of socially responsible behaviour, looking at results, and all of the rest of the things that you can read on the screen. In other words, it's not trying to usurp government's prerogative to regulate. It's not trying to usurp the ILO's labour laws. It's not trying to do any of that. It's trying to go across and either further emphasise and highlight that there are these sorts of things, and also highlight some pragmatic ideas of what it might be as a guide to introduce SR. So why? Well, as I've already said, organisations are looking for competitive advantage. Countries are looking for competitive advantage. And by the way, this standard was the subject of a workshop way back in, I think, 2002 or 2003. I was very lucky. I was on the ISO Technical Management Board, New Zealand's representative at the time, so I actually participated in that workshop. And I think we were really worried. We were actually very curious. Would this standard even get off the launch pad? And one of the reasons it did was that developing countries decided that they wanted the standard. Any idea why? Question?
To get on the same level.
To get on the same level, and also to have a say in setting that level. So this isn't a rich country's standard. This is a broadly based standard. If you're an organisation, you want to enhance your competitive edge. You want to look at your reputation, your ability to attract and retain workers. We have done some studies looking at the economic benefits of standards, case studies on businesses. Very interesting business in Peru called Dampor. This is an organisation that exports agricultural products. Dampor. Sorry. Thank you. So asparagus, peppers, right? I think? Yeah. As a result of their using international standards, they've been able to increase their sales significantly by breaking into the North American market and breaking into the European market. International standards. In the context of this standard, it's also helped them around building communities and helping communities around where they have their plants. And the payback has been very significant in terms of reduced turnover of staff, increase in numbers of people wanting to be employed by the organisation and the like. So this isn't kind of the soft, fluffy stuff. This is there is some real benefit, both to the person who's being employed and to the organisation. And so on. So there's the definition of social responsibility. Everybody agree with that? If you disagree, these people will take it. But looking at how you can take into account a whole lot of things. And it's not philanthropy. We're not going to chuck money at it. I went to an overnight or a workshop held at the UBS training centre, talking about social responsibility. We didn't talk about social responsibility. We talked about a new unit they were setting up to help people be philanthropic for a fee, of course. And then obviously to be sustainable, we've seen that definition many times. So what type of standard is ISO 26000? First of all, it's a guidance standard. You cannot get a certification to the standard. It's not possible. Because of the way it's written, so it should, not shall. It's written as a guidance document, not as a thou shalt do this. And there's a good reason for that, and that is, I think, as the standard was being developed, given the breadth of views on this, I think certification would have been a bridge too far. And secondly, I think, as a way of trying to get a level of consensus to start with, at least, this I think was a good place to be. It may be that we produce a certifiable standard in the future. I'll come to that in a minute. And it's not a management system standard. you can't get a certificate and you can't hang it on the wall and say, I'm now socially responsible. So this standard was developed by the biggest group that's ever developed an ISO standard. Over 450 experts were involved by the end of this process, and this process took 6 years. So those people who lasted the full 6 years got a long service medal, and I'm kidding again, but they should have. And broken into 6, so 99 countries were involved, 6 stakeholder groups involved, 42 liaison organisations involved, and we also involved a twinning process so that the chairs and the secretaries of this working group were from a developed and a developing country working together, in this case Sweden and Brazil. And we also had memorandums of understanding with the International Labour Organization, UN Global Compact, and the Organization for Economic Development. We have since seen 2 mapping documents developed, one by UN Global Compact and the other one by the Global Reporting Initiative, mapping this standard with their social responsible initiatives. Why? Again, trying to harmonise rather than, we want to go this way rather than that way if we can. And ISO and some of the members put together a trust fund so that at least some developing countries could get involved in the work. And there were about 6 rounds. There were 6 rounds, comments after each draft of the standard, and purely by coincidence there were about 26,000 comments for the various drafts of the standard. So the next standard on social responsibility we issue is going to be called ISO 50. One thing about ISO that you should understand is we develop standards in a very open, consensus-based, inclusive way. Anyone who wants to participate can contact their ISO member in their country and then work through mirror committees in the country to provide information and ideas up into the working group. And it's that, so you're getting a double level of consensus. You're getting consensus at the national level, which feeds into that international level. So it's kind of cool. But our definition of consensus isn't the UN definition of consensus. Our definition of consensus is what you see here, which is basically absence of sustained opposition. Okay, so you don't agree, you come to something you can live with. And, that's my Southern Hemisphere interpretation of what we're trying to say here. Now, why is that important? It's important because if you tried for 100% consensus on some of these things, you're not going to go anywhere. And there's lots of examples of that. But if you can have a sustained technical argument, then you will be listened to. And it's the power of that argument that wins the day and gets that consensus level. And so that's what happened. I went to the last of the working group meetings in Stockholm because I'd only just started at ISO and this was my first opportunity. It was amazing. 450 people in a room developing a document. Can you imagine? I mean, if it had been me, I would have needed a whip and a chair to sort of, keep everybody under control. But the twin, the chair, the secretary, the conveners all did a tremendous job. Debate on something. No, we've heard that argument before. Sorry, this is what we agreed. No, that's a good point. Let's change it. No, that's off the point. Forget it. And it was like, ka-dung, 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 ka-dung. 88 pages. Yeah? I wonder what was second prize for the people participating. What were some of the political, quote unquote, I don't mean political as we know it, I mean political issues that were discussed as part of the things and that came up, and which are still there. Certification, your point. Why isn't the standard certifiable? Had a fascinating conversation with a couple of the certifying organisations. So does this mean you can do gap analysis? Yeah, okay. So what happens when you close the gap? Here's where the standard kind of says you should be. Here's where you are. Okay, I'm doing improvement. I reckon I'm right there. Where's my certificate? Okay. It's not intended as a trade barrier. Many of ISO standards, and we have a close link with the WTO, the World Trade Organization, international standards are supposed to be enablers of trade. So this is an international standard. So if you're not at least working towards social responsibility, does that mean that you therefore shouldn't be allowed to trade? Don't think so. An annex that was developed to try and help people cross-reference to other documents, for example, the ILO, the labour laws. Lots of debate about whether that should have been in the standard, left out of the standard, or whatever. Personally, I find it really interesting because I think if you want to find more information about something that's mentioned in the standard, you can go to another document. And I think it reinforces the primacy of some of those other documents. International norms of behaviour. Should you provide for local conditions? Gender equality, for example. Should you allow local norms around gender equality? Sexual preference. Some parts of the world, you literally are executed. Interesting issue. What's the role of government in encouraging this standard? What's the sphere of influence that this standard covers? Is it just the organisation? Or is it the organisation trying to influence the supply chain or value chain? This quote, I think, really sums up what many people felt about the standard. Some people thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and others thought it was a catastrophe. And we want to find out which it was. One, I'll show you some statistics in a minute about the take-up of the standard. But I mentioned before that we're looking to get some feedback as well. So this November, ISO will be hosting a workshop, conference, seminar. Haven't quite worked out what it'll be, but it'll be lots of interaction here in Geneva to actually start a process of looking at the standard. It'll be at Palexpo. I can't tell you exactly the dates yet, but we'll certainly make sure that this team is made aware of the event. So the standard, you can't see that, but you can download this from our website. Basically, is very, I think, very straightforward. What's the scope? What's the term and definitions? What's your understanding of social responsibility? And then what are the principles of social responsibility? So accountability, transparency, ethical behaviour, respect for stakeholder interests, respect for the rule of law, respect for international norms of behaviour, and respect for human rights. And then how do you actually go about putting this in place? So what are the fundamental practices of social responsibility? What are the core subject areas of social responsibility? And in the standards case, it's human rights, labour practices, the environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, and community involvement and development. And then how do you integrate social responsibility throughout your organisation? So I'm not going to talk a lot about the standard. If you have some questions, very happy to try and answer them, and we've got some experts in the audience who can do a lot better job than I can. The standard is not intended for everybody, but it is intended to be more than just corporate. So every organisation is encouraged to become more socially responsible. And as I said, for each of the core subject areas that I just talked about, there's an overview, there's some principles and consideration, and then there's a number of issues that typically could come up, along with some guidance around how you might deal with them. So what? Again, as I said, my favourite question. So far, 36 countries have adopted ISO 26000. 17 more are planning to adopt the standard. And by adopt, I mean you can take an ISO standard as an ISO member and just take it. You don't have to do anything with it. Or you can adopt it. You can actually turn it into a national standard. This is quite useful if you want to have some recognition perhaps given by government or by associations or the like, or if you want to actually do something further with the standard. You can do that. So roughly 30% of ISO's full membership bodies, we have of the 163 members, around about 120 of them are full members of ISO. It's available in 17 languages now, and it's spawned 11 further guidance standards and nationally 8 standards that certify, that provide certification for on social responsibility. We have a web shop here in Geneva as part of the Central Secretariat. We've sold approximately 10,000 standards, and about another 10,000 have been actually sent out to other organisations. Sorry, I keep sitting in front of you. There are 42 mirror committees. These are the groups that I mentioned to you before that are in the countries themselves that are actually monitoring how the standard is going, looking at ideas on how it could be improved, etc. And those 42 mirror committees are something like 1,400 members of those mirror committees. There seems to be medium market interest in that, certainly some calls for certification, and certainly over 30 suggestions for post-public publication activities, including seminars, training, guidance on the guidance standard, standards for versions of the standard for SMEs and the like. As far as ISO Online, our website is concerned, we've received over 300,000 visits up to October last year. I must update the slide. In comparison with our probably 2 best-selling standards, ISO 9001, which is quality management, and ISO 14000, which is environmental management. So it's more than 14,000, but less than 9001. 46% indicate they've developed or developing national tools to support the standard. 50% indicate they've adopted, but have no specific supporting tools, and 86% of ISO members say that they've carried out some form of promotion on the standard. So rather than babble on with numbers, you can kind of see from the graph where the uptake is, and there's lots to go. You can see there's some big gaps. If you look at sort of, for example, I mean, you can do anything with numbers, can't you? But if you look at the BRIC countries, for example, 3 out of 4. Quite interesting. If you look at Africa, that's not great. You may find this interesting. We have some funding for the Middle East, North Africa region. We're running developing a couple of case studies with the ISO member in the country and a company around how you might go about taking up the guide, taking up the standard. And this has been funded by SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency, and it's this country, Morocco, where am I? Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon have all participated in this, and they are still participating. I chair the group that's actually putting this up, characterised by 2 things. One, huge amount of enthusiasm. We had a meeting in Morocco in December to actually review progress, and the progress has been really good. And then, obviously with the political situation, a couple of countries that have either pulled right back and subsequent to that, or have had to slow up a bit. But if they can implement it in those sorts of countries, with the political events going on like that, I think that's pretty telling. What else is happening? Additional information and rumours, so this is all scientific stuff, right? So Ecuador, Peru and Chile have adopted the standard now. Colombia is using Uruguay's standard. Cuba has taken developed a national guidance standard. China, been accepted in more and more of our Chinese companies. A Chinese version of ISO 26000 has been translated and has now been published. Zimbabwe, starting to use it in practice. Azerbaijan, sharing ideas. Netherlands, they actually have a self-direct declaration process. We are using ISO 26000. Portugal, large companies interested. Pakistan and Gabon, regional seminars. Mali, market sees a national standard and ISO 26000 as equal. Jordan, starting to get into the pilot program that I was mentioning before. France has probably had the greatest dissemination and use, or seen the greatest dissemination and use of the standard. The AFNOR, the French member for ISO, did a national roadshow. Lots and lots of workshops. And we're getting, I was told, sort of 1,000 people at a workshop. Pretty cool. And lots of suggestions. Lots need for communication. Suggestions for what we should do. These are the sorts of things that will be picked up in November. But if you've got some other ideas, really love to hear them. Looking at communicating and following up on good and bad examples. Looking at workshops, how you might pull resources, the program I mentioned before. Looking at developing some form of certification or verification methods, and looking at train the trainers and consultants. So, end of my rave. Thank you for listening.